And welcome back. You're still watching The Globe here on SABC News Channel. I am Tshepiso Makwetla. President Cyril Ramaphosa has extended the deployment of the South African National Defence Force to Mozambique for a year. The extension will cost South African taxpayers a whopping 2.8 billion rand. Now, this is the longest extension of the deployment by Ramaphosa. He initially deployed 1,495 SANDF members in July last year. This was extended by 3 months in October and then again in December. In March, Ramaphosa extended the deployment by 1 month from 15 March to 15 April. The SANDF contingent was employed to support the Republic of Mozambique to combat acts of terrorism and violent extremists affecting the northern areas of Mozambique. The extension of the deployment is for the period of 16 April 2022 to 15 April 2023. Ramaphosa says the deployment is in accordance with the Constitution and Defence Act. Apart from the SADC deployment, the Rwandan Defence Force is also supporting the Mozambique Defence Force. Since 2017, a hardline group called Alu Suna Wal Jamaa has been waging a violent insurgency in Cabo Delgado. So let's discuss the latest situation in Mozambique a bit further. We're joined by the Southern Africa project leader at the Institute for Security Studies, Liesl Louw-Vaudran. Liesl, great to chat to you. So should there be alarm expressed at this extension?
Good evening, Tshepiso. No, I don't think alarm. It is probably good that the extension is now for a year. We knew right from the start that this wasn't going to be just for a couple of months. South Africa, of course, is deploying together with Botswana, Tanzania, Lesotho, some smaller contingents also from countries like Zambia and Angola and so on. But it is now for a whole year. As you said, initially the announcement on the 15th of July 2021 was for around 1,500 troops. Now, on the ground, that never actually happened, the full 1,500, which is now actually only being upscaled. There were only a couple of hundred troops, South African troops in the initial stage, which was more rapid deployment as SADC defines it, whereas this second phase, almost scenario 5 phase that we are now in, it will include issues of humanitarian assistance and so on, and not just the offensive rapid deployment as in the initial phase, basically.
Let's first start with the legislative basis on which this is done, the Constitution and Defence Act. Exactly what does it stipulate? What does it allow for?
Yes, I mean, it allows for the South Africa to deploy troops beyond its borders. As you know, we've deployed in the Eastern DRC, places like Darfur and so on. And so of course, it does stipulate that that government must inform Parliament, and President Ramaphosa has now done so again, a formal letter to Parliament. And yes, of course, then the budget, as you say, is significant. The first announcement was for 1 billion rand, now for close to 2.8. But over a period of a year, we know that these deployments are extremely costly. And SAMIM, so the Southern African SADC mission in Mozambique, is going to have to also get funding from other sources. And it has now secured some funding from the African Union through the African Union from the European Union. But you know, in a year, there is going to have to be more funding forthcoming from other sources than the South African taxpayer, definitely.
And just for the South African taxpayer to understand, because I know a lot of people would be aghast at this amount of almost close to 3 billion rand for the extended deployment of South African troops. What is the mandate of SAMIM? What are the terms of reference and why are we invested? As in, to at least justify it to South Africans that regional security is actually paramount.
Yes, absolutely. It is paramount. It's a huge investment. That is true. But we must remember that this kind of threat of terrorism and violent extremism is extremely unpredictable. And we've seen it spread in other parts of the continent, very rapidly. So for now, the SAMIM troops and then the Rwandan troops that you mentioned have been able to contain the spread of this insurgency. At the end of last year, we saw some attacks in another province west of Cabo Delgado, Nyasa province. There are attacks in southern Tanzania as well. So the fear was that it would spread. And also the Mozambique Channel, is economically extremely important. So the South African Navy frigate, the Spion Copa, has now also been deployed there. So I would say it's on various levels. It's important. It's important for the lives of the people in Cabo Delgado. Mozambique is our neighbor, and to assist people to return to their homes. I mean, these attacks at Tshepiso, as you know, have been absolutely very gruesome, and people have been kidnapped, etc. So that's the one thing, the fear of the spread of the insurgency. But also we must remember that huge economic interests, where South African banks and lots of South African companies are invested in the liquid natural gas projects in Cabo Delgado. And hopefully now, with the security being restored to some of the areas, the LNG projects will resume. They were suspended in March last year when there was that big attack on Palma. Energy is, of course, very, very crucial to us and to the whole region. So, but also, yes, so economic interests, peace and security in the region and for the people. But also, I think finally, just to say, Tshepiso, is that we know how international investors think. The minute you say there is violent extremism or terrorism in Mozambique, people think the whole of Southern Africa is unsafe. Unfortunately, people are so ignorant, and especially when it comes to threats, it's extremely important for us to reestablish our region as being largely peaceful, which it has been for a very long time.
You touched on a very important thing, because as you say, the ignorance of investors who don't even think about it as a regional thing. They're those who actually think that Mozambique is in South Africa and vice versa. But perhaps there is a point to be made there, because as you talk about regional security, the loss of lives, some put it at 3,000, but just given how vast some of that area is, where these attacks have been taking place in Cabo Delgado, in Nampula, some of those provinces, it's easy for people to be unaccounted for as these rebels conduct quick raids. So it's, I don't know, you'll share with me the information that you have about what the death toll is, but I suspect that it could be larger than that. And sometimes people forget that we actually share a border with Maputo. So if we don't stem the violence there, it could easily flow into our borders.
Yes, you're absolutely right. I mean, the official toll that we have are, since 2017 now, around 3,000 people having been killed in these attacks. It is rising, and as you know, there's very little information coming out of the area because of also it not being safe. And initially, especially, the government was very reluctant to have any journalists and researchers visiting the area. But every week there are reports of, I would say 2 or 3 times a week, we get reports of attacks, small villages, people being, as I said, brutally attacked and kidnapped, chased off and their villages burned down. 800,000 people, according to the United Nations, have already been internally displaced in Cabo Delgado because of this threat. The UNHCR, the UN High Commission for Refugees, have said very recently, last month, that it's not safe for people to return to their homes. So even though the situation has improved a little bit, it definitely is still an ongoing threat. The question about it spreading to South Africa across the border, southwards, I think is unlikely. And yet there's the threat of, I think it was 2020 when the Islamic State threatened South Africa that there would be reprisals if South Africa was to get involved militarily. We haven't seen that since, but there's always that fear, that somehow the instability in Cabo Delgado, as I said, would perhaps spread regionally to southern Tanzania and countries like Malawi, perhaps. But South Africa is the big power in the region, and we are also tasked with leading some of these peace initiatives. At this very moment, we are the chair of the Organ on Politics, Defence and Security of SADC. So, it is also our mandate at this point to lead these kind of...
And I raised that the insecurity for South Africa for a reason, Liesl, because I remember, I think it was several months ago, speaking to a peace and security expert who was saying that we mustn't for a single moment think that there isn't a connectedness between the violence that we're seeing in the SADC region. And at that time, Mozambique was on fire, Swaziland was on fire, and I use these terms metaphorically, and there was also destabilization in Zimbabwe. So I speak about the interconnectedness there, the security threat. Is the ISS saying that it's not picked up any evidence that they are, because sometimes you have unaccounted for agents of these rebel groups who infiltrate into the country and have done so unnoticed?
Yes, of course, definitely. And yes, my colleagues and I have done a lot of research. Also, the issue of, illicit trafficking. There is a very strong link between actually Cabo Delgado province and now the Nampula and so on with drug trafficking towards South Africa. There's a financial link also. A lot of the financing that the American government has actually pointed out, some of the finances of the extremist groups based in South Africa. So there are all kinds of links. When you talk about, as you say, various violent incidents or instability or in various different countries, I think the link there is also the issue of poverty and marginalization and problems of actually combating that. Excuse me. So sorry, it's a piece of. That is definitely a link, I would say, that we should also be looking at, because ultimately these groups also recruit amongst populations that are frustrated, marginalized. That is how some of these violent extremist groups also recruit, preying almost on the situation of underdevelopment and poverty.
Perhaps you could just tell us a little bit more about this jihadist organization, Ahlu Sunnah wal Jamaa, and if it has established any roots, links within South Africa or within proximity of South Africa for us to be concerned. You would recall that apart from, as you say, the intelligence coming from the Americans, but there have been various papers which you're aware of that have written about the Islamization of Africa and the security threat. Cape Town has been said to be a bedrock housing a lot of those extremists. Just how great is the threat, or is it still at stages which we can employ counter surveillance to stop it?
Yes, look, that is a very, very tricky issue, and it's impossible really to say, especially Al-Sunnah in Cabo Delgado, that group, there have not been evidence of any claims by the Islamic State, which they claim to be linked to at all with any groups in South Africa. So the Islamic State has on many occasions, for example, when that big attack took place in Palma, have claimed and said these are our fighters. The Islamic State of the Central African province, which is linked between then the Al Sunna in northern Mozambique, with the ADF and groups that are based in eastern DRC. So almost that link. So it's almost northwards, East Africa and the Great Lakes region. That is where, as I say, the Islamic State propaganda makes that link. There's never been any link with groups that would be based in South Africa at all whatsoever. And there's been never any evidence of that. I was just saying that the evidence in terms of financing, transiting through South Africa is one. But then the issue of possible radicalization and cells being present in South Africa, that is a whole other situation. You know, some of my other colleagues work on those issues, the Tulsi twins and some of the incidents that we've
Black
seen.
Widow.
But it's been... Exactly. It's exactly like the Black Widow. That was years ago. You know, we really haven't seen much evidence. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but in terms of the research doesn't show that.
Liesl, thank you so much for your time and your insights as always. Great chatting to you. Liesl Louw-Vaudran is the Southern Africa project leader at the Institute for Security Studies, speaking to us about South Africa extending by a year its deployment to Mozambique as part of that SADC mission. Samim.